Our first question this week comes from Blood Red Hog, who asks, with the thin depth at quarterback, even with Felipe Franks, has there been any talk about Pittman or by Pittman or Connor Nolan about Nolan coming back to play quarterback? We keep getting this question. I promise you, Connor Nolan is not coming back to the football team. On Friday, Dave Van Horn said his best guess is that Connor will be the Friday night starter. There's no way if you're in the weekend rotation, certainly if you're the Friday night guy, the staff ace, that you're going to be splitting time with football. The only way I can see that working for a pitcher would be if maybe he was a midweek reliever, and then he might be able to participate in spring football, and you know. But it's just not going to happen. You're not going to be that important to the Razorback baseball team and have that kind of future in baseball and kind of try to split time. He would end up probably affecting him in both sports. Okay, PORKSODA wants to know, looking at football, baseball, and basketball, who is a newcomer that you're excited to see in the upcoming season? You know, for baseball, there's two of them, Robert Moore and Braden Webb. Now, Moore, he's the 17-year-old second baseman that we've talked about. In about 2 weeks, I think he's going to become the youngest player ever to start for the Razorbacks. Terrific second baseman. He got a base hit off Connor Nolan in Saturday's first scrimmage. He's an unbelievable infielder. The fans are going to love the kid. Webb was a junior college All-American. They're kind of at opposite ends of the spectrum. Webb has all this experience. He was a great player in junior college. He's come in here and in 3 scrimmages hit either 2 or 3 home runs, depending on who you talk to. Great hitter. He's apparently going to be the leadoff guy and play left field. And Moore is going to bat 9th in the order. And the kid's a good contact hitter, so if he's in your 9-hole, that shows you what kind of hitting they're going to have for the Razorback baseball team this year. But I'm excited to see both of those guys. Jumpty is curious. Mike, did you know why Connor Vanover did not get immediate eligibility? I thought he had a good case, especially when others with similar cases did get immediate eligibility. Let me just say this, there's very little logic or consistency to anything the NCAA does. It's a ridiculous governing body. They really ought to just trash that thing and build it from the ground up. And on rulings like this, on early or immediate eligibility, to me, it ought to be spelled out. There ought to be a series of guidelines, and you just look at the guidelines and you can tell whether a guy's going to have immediate eligibility or not. There shouldn't be this arbitrary debate with somebody making the decision. Just put it down in black and white. You either fit this profile or you don't. You're going to sit out or you're not going to sit out. So I would say that that's part of the problem here. But with regard to this specific issue about Connor Vanover, look, he's up to about 235 right now. He's a terrific shooter. They need for him to get more physical. They're going to have him for 3 more years if he sticks around. I could see him up to 240 next year, maybe getting up to pushing 250 his junior or senior year. And the more physical he is, the more multidimensional he's going to be as a basketball player and the more help he's going to give them. So, yeah, it's hard to do without him this year, but I think they will benefit next year, the year after, and the year after for him having sat out this year. Said 76 asked, back in the mid-90s, when Arkansas basketball was competing at a very high national level, was there ever any talk about the NBA teams or any NBA teams wanting Nolan Richardson? You know, I'm not sure about the NBA. I did have a conversation with Nolan when he got back from Denver. That was in 1990 after he'd gone to his first Final Four. And you have to understand what he'd been through from 85 up to 1990. A lot of problems. His daughter died. Frank almost fired him once. A lot of the fans were angry early on. And I really thought, now that he'd turned the program around and had gone to the Final Four, he was going to get offers and he was going to leave. And I asked him about that, and he said, yeah, I've gotten offers, not going anywhere. And he even said to me at that time, he said, I will stay here until my career is over. And he said, I'll probably get fired. He knew he was controversial with Frank and some of the boosters. He predicted then, a long time before it happened, that it would happen. A lot of people felt like that after he was fired and then filed the lawsuit and lost the lawsuit, he'd leave the state and go back to El Paso. He never had any intention of doing that. He's still here. And he is one of those guys that came in from the outside, just like Frank Broyles, with no previous ties to Arkansas, and just bought into the Razorback culture. So much so that he's never left, and he's still here and still coming to games. Okay, Bacon the Saddle again wants to know, is it plausible that the Hogs see a Houston Nutt-esque type first year under Pittman? Not necessarily 9 wins and a ranked finish, but a surprise season that results in soundly rising above expectations. It seems that a few of the key components for such a turnaround are in place. There is one key component that is not in place, and that is the difference between the SEC West in 1998 and now, because there's a huge difference. Much harder to do a turnaround like that. The only similarities I would say is that there was a feeling in '98 that Arkansas didn't have much talent, and Danny Ford was actually a good recruiter, and they did have talent, and Houston Nutt was able to take advantage of that. I think this team is more talented than a lot of people realize, but it's the schedule that's different. And the first game right off the bat for Houston Nutt was SMU. Now, why was SMU a big deal? Because Danny Ford couldn't beat SMU. And the talk back then when Houston Nutt took over was you got to beat SMU. If you beat SMU, you're starting to turn this program around. Well, they played them in Little Rock and beat them soundly. So that's nice. But guess what Pittman gets instead of SMU in Little Rock? He gets Notre Dame, on the road. You got to go up there and play them there. There's a huge difference. So it's the schedule that's going to keep this from being a big turnaround. I would say 4 wins or 5 wins would be a good turnaround this first year. HOGWILD asks, with Bielema taking a job with the Giants, will that impact the litigation over his buyout payments? It's possible, but here's how this generally works, and this is what caused the problem in the first place. Whatever your buyout calls for, and it's different in different contracts, if you go out, first of all, you have to prove that you're actually trying to get another job. You can't just sit there and collect that money. And secondly, if you get a job, they look at how much money you're making and compare it to what that job generally pays. And that's what really came into play when Arkansas stopped paying Bielema's buyout. They didn't feel like he was getting enough money for what he was doing, and I think he was working as a volunteer coach for a while. They didn't feel like he had fulfilled the terms of the buyout, which was go out and try to get another job. He just sort of, hey, pay me the money. So they haven't paid him in a while. Now this thing is going to probably won't go to court. It'll probably be settled out of court. And the way this could impact this thing is if he's got a good job with the Giants and he's happy and he's making decent money, he might be willing to accept less in terms of a buyout. In other words, Arkansas might be willing to say, look, here's what we'll pay you. We're not paying you anything lately, but we'll give you this settlement, and will you accept that? And if it's lower than what he wants, if he didn't have this good job with the Giants, he might be more inclined to say, no, pay me the money. I think now he's more inclined to take whatever settlement they offer. I was there in 1969 has turned comedian on us. He asked, what is the likelihood of Chad Morris taking off on Friday nights to watch his son pilot the OU scout squad through their walkthrough for the following day's game? Will he use the Auburn jet, fly commercial, jump in his car, hit the left lane, and hammer down all the way to Norman? Pretty funny, but really, this thing with Chad Morris is interesting because it was announced just last week. We knew he was supposedly going to run the offense at Auburn, but Gus Malzahn's basically stepped in and said, I'm putting the whole thing in his hands. I'm turning it over to him. Now, there's still people that don't believe that's true, but that's what Gus says. Now, here's the part that almost stuns me. I've read a number of online articles about this whole thing. Some of them written by national guys, some of them written by SEC writers, others Auburn beat writers. It's like Chad Morris was never at Arkansas. They talk about what a great job he did at Clemson. They talk about how their offense scored a lot of points at SMU. Arkansas is never mentioned. And then when you read the comments from Auburn's fans, it's like, knock, knock. Are you paying any attention at all? Do you know what happened at Arkansas? They couldn't score in the red zone. They couldn't develop a quarterback. Their offense went backwards. Nothing he said made any sense. And what, are you going to blame that all on Joe Craddock, like Morris had nothing to do with it? So that's the surprise to me, that there hasn't been more pushback at Auburn, like, what are you doing, Gus? And even the people that are writing pieces on this, it's not like they're even considering that Chad Morris might be coming off a bad situation, and you might ought to reevaluate that Clemson thing, because he wasn't at Clemson for a long time, and he's sure ridden the coattails of that for a while now. But either way, we're about to find out, aren't we? PORKSODA is back with a good follow-up question to that. What is the likelihood fans will stop being obsessed with ex-coaches, or is it like battered women syndrome that takes years of therapy to get over? Well, you know, that doesn't happen with all coaches at Arkansas, but it seems to be more with football coaches than basketball coaches. I mean, I don't think the fans are mad at Mike Anderson. I didn't sense there was a lot of anger for John Pelfrey and some of these other guys. Even with Nolan, there was some people mad when he filed the lawsuit. But you don't see that anger the way you see with football. I think it goes back to Houston Nutt. A lot of that was the Malzahn, Mitch Mustain stuff, where the whole seemed like the fan base was divided over that. But I think it got made worse when he went to Ole Miss, because now he's bringing Ole Miss into Arkansas every other year, and he had some success and won here. So that made a lot of people mad. I don't sense the anger so much now that he's out of coaching. Now, John L. Smith, come on. The anger there was the guy was a con man, and I think they should have been angry at Jeff Long, but you know, this guy came in and collected $800,000 and did nothing, basically sat with his feet propped up on his desk. Then you get to Bobby Petrino, and Petrino was actually before that, but Petrino, there was some anger maybe from some people when he got fired. There were also other people who didn't think he should be fired, but look at the support he got at the Little Rock Touchdown Club this past fall. So I don't sense there's a lingering anger toward Bobby Petrino. Now let's go to Brett Bielema. The anger toward Bielema is this. The idea that he came in here, built the thing up in 3 years and was just ready to take off and was making all these bold statements, and then he apparently just sat back with his feet propped up and expected his coaches to get the job done, and he had a good time down on Dixon Street. Word of that circulated around. Fans got angry, but I think where the anger really exploded was when he left here with that $12 million settlement. People were like, what is that? You took this program up a little bit and took it down, and you walked out of here with $12 million and left us, and then we end up with no AD, and you hire this guy, Chad Morris. So there's anger toward Bielema, but it's totally different with Morris, and here's why. I talked earlier about coming in here and buying into the Razorback culture. You got to do that. We've seen that with Musselman. We've seen that with Sam Pittman. You didn't see that with Chad Morris. He always seemed like a stranger. And it wasn't just that he didn't bring his family here. He just, I don't know, he just didn't seem to fit, and the fans picked up on that. Didn't like the way he did press conference. He was always uncomfortable. And then look at what happened when he was fired. You could talk about Matt Luke at Ole Miss, Joe Moorhead at Mississippi State, Barry Odom at Missouri. All of those guys got fired. What did they do? They issued statements for the fans to see. Hey, I'm sorry it didn't work out, did my best. I really appreciate what you guys did in supporting our program, and I'll always have good feelings and thoughts about the fans here, and good luck in the future. With Chad Morris, you know what it was? Crickets. He didn't say anything. So I think there's just an anger about all of that. You never belonged here in the first place, but now it's going to go to another level when he comes back in here with Gus Malzahn. I promise you, there's going to be even more anger. It's going to go back to sort of like it was when Houston Nutt came in here with Ole Miss, although I think it's going to go up beyond that, because at least Nutt had some success here. Morris just burned the program down. That's basically what he did. He might as well just set fire to the place. Okay, Oklahoma asks, with signing day approaching, can you go back over the odd saga of Darius Philon? It's a great Cinderella story. There was also Javante Herndon, who got notified he had an offer while sitting in class on signing day. Are there other examples of these really bizarre signing day stories? You know, my memory on Philon is not perfect. I could have a few of the details wrong, but I believe he was set to sign. He found out right before he thought he was signing with Alabama that they ran out of scholarships and they didn't have one for him, so they wanted him to gray shirt. And apparently that happens with Alabama a lot. So he's from Alabama. He thinks he's going to sign with Alabama. He's all set to do it. Guy tells him, no, we want you to gray shirt, so you have to pay your own way this fall. And they figured he would do that. Instead, he makes a quick check with the Arkansas people, because remember, they weren't sure if he was coming here or not, but they'd offered him. And he said, do I still have an offer there? And they were absolutely. And that was a big surprise, because they expected to lose him. And so he just went back in and sat down and signed with Arkansas. Remember talking with him a couple of years later, and he said, yeah, that was a bad deal on signing day, but he said, you know what? From the minute I put that Razorback hat on, I bought into it, I felt good about it, and he said, I'm glad I did it, and he ended up being very popular with the fans. But the most bizarre signing day story still has to be Alex Collins, running back out of Miami. all set to sign with Arkansas. His mother wants him to stay in South Florida, go to Miami. So she refuses to sign his letter of intent. He's sitting there and she won't sign it. So he has to stop the ceremony, get up, walk outside, got on his cell phone, took him a while, had to try to find his dad who he hadn't seen in a while, finally got his number, called him and said, hey, can you help me out here? Can you sign this thing? The dad said, sure. I think it took till the next day to get it done. Razorback fans are sitting around on pins and needles because this was a 4-star running back out of South Florida. But it worked out, and he ended up coming here and, of course, ended up being one of Brett Bielema's best recruits and one of the better running backs ever to play at Arkansas. Blood Red Hog is back with a basketball question. I believe Musselman is the best coach we've had since Nolan. However, we lack height and depth, and we're now playing 2 games a week. Are you still confident we can hit the 20-win mark and make the NCAA tournament, or is this team getting tired with all the heavy minutes played? You know, that question was posted last week before the TCU game, and it's a good question at the time because I felt that way myself. I was really wondering, okay, now you're in conference play. You're not only playing more games, but you're playing a lot more road games. The competition is better, and these guys have, you know, they got to be getting tired sooner or later. Maybe those 2 losses were an example of that, and also the fact that they were dealing with bigger, more physical teams. And yet, when I went back and looked at that Mississippi State game when it was over, sometimes what you see can be deceiving to your eyes because the statistics showed me they actually played really well. There was just one thing that stood out, and that was those 33 free throws that Mississippi State shot to 11 for Arkansas. That's 3-to-1 imbalance. And most of it was on Reggie Perry. Reggie Perry shot 15 free throws against Arkansas. The next week, or the next game when he went to Norman, you know how many he shot? None. That's a big difference. So I tend to look back on that Mississippi State game and say it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. And then you go to the TCU game where you start talking about this depth issue and are they wearing out? You take a starter completely out of the game and he's your second leading scorer and you just have 3 other guys step up and they combine for 58 points. And there was no evidence at the end of that game that Arkansas was running out of gas. That's when they hit the gas and pulled ahead. So again, and they're going up against a 6'11", 250-pound center that had them bamboozled for a while. But if you look at what happened down the stretch, that guy was shut out in the last minutes of the game. So again, there's just all this thing that we seemed worried about just never happens. I don't think there's really evidence that they're wearing down. I don't think this deal where every night you're going out and playing somebody with a big center has hurt them that badly. And now they're sitting there with 15 wins, might go to 16 Wednesday night against, who are they playing Wednesday night, guys? South Carolina. Had Mississippi State on the brain. So could have 16 wins there. And then you're about 4 games away from going to the NCAA tournament. I think they'll win about 22, 23, maybe 24 games. And I don't think there's any sign that they're wearing down or that this whole lack of height thing is really hurting them. Let's go to the next question. Are there any plans to renovate Bud Walton Arena? I had heard rumors of additional luxury boxes. Now that basketball is a hot ticket again, maybe a hard sell to reduce seating. Yeah, I think it would be a hard sell to Eric Musselman. Imagine Hunter Yurachek, like some of these fans who say they want to reduce it to 14,000. You picture Hunter Yurachek going to Eric Musselman and saying, I think I'll take about 4,000 seats out of this building. What, are you nuts? As a matter of fact, I talked to somebody in the athletic department after the game on Saturday, asked about the renovation plans. He said there are plans, but he doesn't know anything, hasn't heard anything about removing seats out of there to build more luxury boxes. I think they could put some on the ends of the upper deck without removing seats. I think what you're going to see, though, is a lot of those changes are going to be cosmetic, and they may do some things to provide a better kind of dining area of activity for the people that sit next to the court. Right now they're stuck in the old weight room, and they might do some things like that, but I don't think they're going to remove seats. That would be totally nuts. Hogfat says there are 7 football scholarship spots still open, other than the obvious O-line positions. Where are the Hogs have most need for quality depth in additions, not just numbers, and what do you figure the odds to be that those needs will be filled to a satisfactory degree? Well, they need another quarterback, and Otis tells me he thinks they'll get one, so that looks good. Had a big setback in the O-line in that they lost a guy to Florida State they thought they had, so that's not good. I'm not sure there's a tight end out there they really want, and I don't think Otis feels real confident about that too. So you start looking at some of this and you say for the remaining scholarships that are there available, it might not be good. In fact, if you'll remember, Sam Pittman said in his first press conference that he wasn't going to sign guys just to fill numbers, that if they didn't feel like they could get the 25 quality guys, they might end up 3 or 4 short and just hold those over for next year. But Otis told me yesterday he doesn't think that's going to happen. So that sounds like he thinks one way or another they're going to get people that will fill these scholarships that they feel that can help them. Okay, next question. Jeff Long fired Bobby Petrino appropriately, in my opinion, for, among other things, embarrassing the University of Arkansas. What, if anything, do you believe will happen at the University of Kansas related to the recent basket brawl? You know, I've addressed this before. The popular national opinion among the national writers at the time, they were all falling all over themselves congratulating Jeff Long. I mean, geez, what a guy. I mean, you had this popular coach and he was winning games and he was doing crazy things, and most ADs would have just winked and looked the other way, but Jeff Long, the tough guy, made the tough decision and got rid of Bobby Petrino. Anybody that knows Petrino, that has talked to him about what went on in those days, gets a different story. I can understand it if you don't want to believe Petrino, but what he told people was this, that he did have an option of coming back, that he had a meeting with Jeff Long, and Jeff Long said, look, I'm going to present you with an amended contract. It's going to have a bunch of behavior items in it, a behavior clause. And you have to agree to this, and we'll go along with this for a few months and see if if everything's okay. And if it is, then you'll be all right. And Petrino's explanation was he knew how bad Razorback fans wanted to be relevant in the SEC. It had been embarrassing ever since they got in. And he had made them relevant. They were in the top 5 in the nation his last year. They had finished in the top 3 in the SEC, and I think second one of those years in those last 2 years he was here. So he said, I felt like that I was so popular with what I had done that I could do whatever I wanted to, and I didn't have to worry about Jeff Long. So he told him no, he wouldn't sign the amended contract. And he really pushed Jeff Long into a corner, and that's why he ended up getting fired. Now, what does this have to do with Kansas? Well, I sort of get the idea from your question that you sort of expect tough guy Jeff Long to step in and go after Bill Self. And that's not what I'm hearing. In fact, I'm being told that if push came to shove, Bill Self has more power at Kansas than Jeff Long. And Jeff Long was hired to solve the football program, not mess with basketball. And even though there are all these rumors that Kansas basketball is about to go on probation, the fight's a black eye and all this stuff, look at the actual suspensions. They were more or less a slap on the wrist. So I don't think there's any evidence at this point that Jeff Long, the tough guy, is going to go after Bill Self. Redleg asks, what is a reasonable expectation for the 2020 Diamond Hogs? And if you had a guess, will Dave Van Horn win a College World Series national championship before he retires? Yes, I think he will. I don't know if this is the year, but I do know that on paper, this looks about as good as I've ever seen. I mean, they are so solid at almost every position, in the infield, in the outfield. They've got hitters galore. I talked about the leadoff guy, the JUCO transfer that's hitting home runs already in these scrimmages. You've got a guy all the way down at the 9-man in the order who's, you know, a good contact hitter, got a hit off of Connor Nolan in the first scrimmage, and yet he's a terrific second baseman. They're good in the infield defensively. They can all hit the ball. The outfield is solid with people hitting the ball, and maybe a little bit of question about Heston Kjerstad's defense out in right field, but no question about what he does at the plate. You know, I think they've got depth for a good bullpen. Here's the only thing that's different. If you go back for the last 2 years, if you're talking about Blaine Knight and Isaiah Campbell, you know what they did over the last 2 years? 26-1 on Friday nights. 26-1. That's never going to happen again. So no matter what Connor Nolan does, you know, it's not going to be that. I just don't see it happening. So you're probably not going to have a Friday night guy that's a guaranteed win, and you're probably not going to have a guy that's guaranteed to go about 7 innings. And so that makes a difference. Your bullpen comes more into play. If you don't win the Friday night game, it puts a lot more pressure on you for the other 2 games. So that's the only question I have. It's not that I'm saying I don't think those are good pitchers. I think they'll have a good starting rotation. I think their bullpen is going to be deep. And maybe a little bit of question about who's going to be the closer, just because they've had such good closers over the last few years. So if there are questions, not major question marks, but maybe just not what they were from a pitching standpoint, although I'm not saying that it won't be. It's just right now on paper, you can see where it would be hard to equal what they've done. But in every other respect, top of the lineup all the way down to the bottom, I don't see any holes as far as hitting. They got one of the best catchers in baseball. They've got 3 preseason All-Americans on their team, 2 of them first team, 3 of them on one team. That is amazing. I know that's never happened at Arkansas. So I think we're all looking forward to the Razorback baseball season. Well, that's it for another week. I'll see you again next Monday when we'll do this all over again for Ask Mike.